Hey, hello everybody. Just want to see if the guys from outside can come in, and we're trying to keep our program on time. And as you know, after this afternoon, we're all heading out to the Stone Money Quarry. And I'm also very happy to reconfirm His Excellency the President has said he will meet us all there. So it will be a good opportunity for us to take some photo ops with the President by the Stone Money for good luck about the original blockchain in the history of man, right? So let's give the floor to Elaine to get the program going, and let's engage and learn more about from the next speakers. Elaine, here's the microphone.
Thank you, Alan. So here we start the afternoon session. I hope you enjoy the morning sessions. Afternoon sessions are, of course, a pack of interesting, inspiring talk. The first speaker is a very, very special lady, and also a friend of mine. I feel we connected so much. She is amazing expert in the future of governance, co-founder and CEO of Restate Foundation, and did work in World Economic Forum, United Nations, and flew all the way from Switzerland to here. Restate Foundations explore the future of governance, conscious leadership, and basically to explore that the way governments work, not only the technology needs to be upgraded, the humanity also needs to be upgraded. So here, let's welcome Anastasia Kalerina.
Thank you. Hello everyone, and I hope somebody will give me a time notice, because I can speak about this all day, every day. Thank you so much. By the way, I think this one. Thank you. So yes, my name is Anastasia. I do feel very connected to Elaine, and sometimes, and it's becoming easier and easier to meet your people and understand immediately that they are your people. So I'm very happy and privileged to be here and speak to you today about something that I'm sure we all find very important, and that is the future of governance. If we could bring up the presentation again on the screen, that would be super helpful.
The presentation.
Thank you, but I can already start speaking to you a little bit about what the foundation that I represent here does. We look into the future of governance largely. We understand that this is becoming a core issue that is a dependency on which so many other issues are dependent. So we believe that it has to be looked at with a very close focus of attention. We discover governance from various perspectives, primarily technological capabilities, what could be done in the field of governance from the technological perspective. And here, of course, all the emerging technologies from blockchain to AI to other emerging technologies are super helpful, but we need to understand how to make sure that governance is becoming more decentralized, more transparent, more participatory thanks to these technologies. Importantly, we also think that it's not just the machines that have to be upgraded, but also the human beings. The way the world operated up until this point brought us here, and so maybe it's time to reassess the qualities, the very qualities of the leadership that are required to enact the change that we want to see in the world. We also deal with what we call the new realities, and that is understanding how we can look differently at the economic systems, educational systems, governance systems of the world, because clearly many of them are less relevant because they were based on the premises of the past that helped create them, but they might be not so relevant anymore. And frankly, we're big believers in the optimistic visions for the future, because the doom and gloom that we see around the world today makes us think that there's not much we can do, and we're sort of going into this abyss. But in fact, many of the things that we will discuss here today are actually creating optimism, creating hope, creating agency. And so we're trying to highlight the good parts of what we're collectively building, rather than just focusing on the negative ones. We like to say at Free State Foundation that governance is a new climate, in a sense that when you look back at the history of the climate movement, some decade ago, it was not a discussion that was held everywhere. It was behind closed doors, the scientists were raising concerns, but it was sort of marginalized. It's very hard to believe right now, but it was. And so we argue that the same thing might be happening with governance. Right now, it's a discussion in places like this, in places like Zuzalo, it's a little bit experimentation going on everywhere, but it's not so widespread as it might be, and I would argue will be in the next decade. So for that matter, we need to look at how we can help defy the challenges that we've identified as the following. The world is increasingly divided. It's always an agenda of us versus them, and there are very limited spaces where we can try collaborative approaches. Zuzulu, where I was, is one. Hopefully in Palau, the digital nomads community can create something, but these spaces are very, very limited. Governance systems worldwide are very obsolete. They're based on the past, and if you think about it, we still rely on the international system of the 20th century, Bretton Woods, the financial institutions. We look at the democratic tools of the 19th century, representative democracy, elections. They're all great, but we might need to experiment to see what else they could bring. And we rely on very few things that are actually relevant for today. The gloomy media agenda is only exacerbating what we have right now. As I said, there is a lack of alternative narratives that are more optimistic. And the basic technological change is very steep, as opposed to the moral development that is sort of staling. And this is the research we have done, looking at 6,000 years of history of civilization. We're advancing very fast with technology, ethics and morality kind of staling, and the growing gap is something that we can really discuss and look at, and it's sort of urgent that we do that. We look at all the ways in which governance could get upgraded, and for that we've also created something that is open source, and we welcome your contributions, called the Future Governance Goals, much like SDGs, the Sustainable Development Goals. They are a visionary framework to aspire to get to certain governance principles, and we need some sort of a guiding star. So we've crowdsourced the creation of them, and it's still work in progress, so I implore you to also have a look and discuss together all of these principles that would hopefully make the governance better, more decentralized, more efficient, more participatory for people. And of course, I was already given a sign of 5 minutes. We are looking into some particular examples from around the world of how communities and countries are already upgrading their governance. And here, just some very few examples that might inspire you, especially if you represent smaller and more agile nations. It's very obvious that these experiments are way more likely to happen in places that could afford being more agile. So some of these things, a lot of DAOs are creating enormous change by experimenting with how the participants govern themselves through holding the tokens, through being, at the edge of how their community is developing, but also countries. Recently, Estonia has adopted the DAO for their e-residents, so now e-residents are helping shape that. We have quadratic voting experiments happening very modestly and very humbly, but it's already starting. In the US, Colorado, they're basically experimenting with those. There are some decentralized self-sovereign ID experimentation going on. About 600 companies right now working on creating different sorts of SSI, but also countries and cities. Toronto, Canada is adopting some of the leading-edge SSI solutions. There are blockchain-based land and property records in several countries already. There are supply chain traceability and transparency being adopted in corporate governance and in cities around the world. And of course, the protocols used by Ethereum, where people could contribute their ideas and vote on those ideas, and this way enact the governance layer that are participatory driven is a very good example of that. But also countries like Lithuania trying to enact this decentralized governance on blockchain in the very same fashion. There are token-based incentive systems for public goods. There are some climate governance and carbon markets where you can trade and purchase carbon credits to offset your carbon footprint. Barbados is a champion of pledging to become carbon neutral. And of course, Palau with the Palau Pledge is a great example of how governance could become more innovative, but also how a small country could create an example for the whole world that I hope many more will follow. Citizen participation is on the rise everywhere in the world. There's impact investment in DeFi space using NFTs. So the innovation is booming, but these examples are still very few, very few. So I implore you to also be sharing, collecting, exchanging these examples and promote innovative cultures wherever you are, the culture of experimentation. But of course, I know I'm out of time, very important that we do not only look at technology and innovative spaces, but we look for innovative spaces within ourselves. Clearly, if we want to bring about the change that is needed and defy the status quo, we need to look at things in a different fashion. The status quo has to go, we need to transcend the traditional understanding of authority and understand that without safeguarding human rights, without fostering the collaboration, without catering to the planetary needs, we cannot survive, quite literally. So this is yet another dimension that we could look at into together, but since we're out of time, I would invite many of you to have one-on-one discussions and keep exploring. But really, it's only through collaboration and exchanging these examples and communities like this that we can, bring about this change that is very much overdue and heavily needed. So hopefully, governance can be seen not only as part of the solution, but also as part of the solution, not just part of the problem. Thank you very much, and
thank you, Anastasia. Stay on. Let's have one question from the audience. Anastasia's work is, she told me she was supposed to present this work in the UN meetings in September, but then she wanted to talk about it earlier in here, so that we indeed have the honor to have her to talk about. So, one question from the audience?
Yes.
Yes.
Hi. So I was just wondering, you spoke about changing government mindsets and all of that. What did you think of what President Whips had talked about this morning in terms of where Palau is headed, and he really laid out that vision of Palau, and I think the governments, the folks, our friends from Marshalls, I think even from CNMI, were also particularly interested in that, because I think you're right, we do see the world changing. There is a lot of doom and gloom, and so I think there is this sort of search for something new, something that gives us that hope. So just
Sure. With pleasure. Well, I want to start with just saying that he's a human being. The president is a human being that you can sit next to, talk to. I've spoken to a lot of different presidents all through my career. I can't always say that they're human, frankly. Sorry about this, you might want to cut this off. But seriously, the fact that he is who he is, I think, could really mean that something is possible in Palau. And in terms of what you're building, again, like I said, agile country, small nation, very particular problems that you're trying to solve, could be a blueprint for others to follow. Seriously, if you can allow yourself to innovate with that boldness and that, intensity, that could only get you very far. Well, it also has a flip side, because if you're the first ones to try something, you may fail, and you may fail again, but at the same time somebody has to give. Somebody has to try it, and it will work, and then it will allow others to follow suit. And it will allow others to see that these things are possible, and we need to change the mindset. And so I think it really starts at home, and it starts with you. So the vision that was presented, I believe, is the one that we need, and many countries actually need.
All right, have another question.
Yeah, it's over there.
Thank you for a great speech. I do have a question about the example that you raised regarding governance. You talk about one example from the Residence ID program, and the other example is the Great Pledge of the Palau. So speaking of governance, what are those critical steps that need to be followed in order to establish an effective governance? In order to establish an effective governance.
What are the key steps?
What are those key steps? Yes.
Okay, well, that would require probably a much larger keynote. But I think changing the culture. Many governments, and we work with a lot, many governments are very not willing to fail. And the whole culture in the public service is that would punish the failure. So that mindset makes people super cautious. And this way, it's very difficult to do anything that is a little bit outside of the box. So I say everything starts with culture, and then also exploring what is out there in the world. You know, the reason why I showed all of these examples is because they're already out there. Things have already been tested and tried, and they were actually successful, all of this. So what it takes is just adopting the mindset that helps you to innovate more, and use the examples that are already there, get inspired. And then, you know, of course, who is responsible for what? The people that, you know, make the fabric of this innovation, that's key. You know, if they are willing and able to understand what the society needs, what the people really need, connect with, you know, with people on the human level, that would be also very important.
Thank you.
Thank you, Anastasia. We were very enlightened by your wisdom here. So next we have, sorry, in the afternoon section we have like back-to-back 15 minutes talk. So all the speakers will have to pay attention to the time reminder. But next speaker is Suji Yan, co-founder and CEO of Mask Network. And he will be talking about this network state movement and the project he's doing. If you do not know network state means a country of people that exists solely on the internet. You engage, you interact, you create as all over the internet, but not in the physical world. Well, sometimes you do, but mostly in the internet. But how do you actually get recognition? How do you actually get other countries to recognize you as a country, not just a DAO? So Suji's title will be Entering Network State, the Revolution, and the future of decentralized social.
Hello. Hello.
Not that one.
Yeah, a little introduction about myself. I'm Suji and I jumped into the crypto space, I think back in 2016, 2017. And then that time I dropped off from college. Before that, I was also a journalist, I was an engineer, I had many different experiences. But after that, I spent most of my time for my own project, Max Network, which is a decentralized social network project. Okay. So this is something I did before full-time in crypto. It's something called like 996.ICU. Probably you guys heard of that in the media. That's like the anti-overworking culture in China, which got viral in 2018, 2019. Get reported by all these major media, right? And it says like, oh, we should not, overwork. Tech workers are workers. But it didn't solve the problem fundamentally. The reason this is like a tech worker class has some fundamental reason, right? And the more we dig into this area, the more we figure out there's nothing to do. And something I learned over the years, and also combined with the knowledge of the network state, thesis of network state, is that we are actually in this very interesting stage of the cyberspace. So in my opinion, this is not only my opinion, there's like some interesting opinions. I think cyberspace is an independent space. It's like the America, right? America is an independent space. It's the new continent. And all of us is not born in cyberspace. We take the Mayflower to the cyberspace. Mayflower may be our phone, maybe our laptop, but we just somehow move to the cyberspace, right? And there's different stage of the governance of the cyberspace. So the first stage is we just found out, oh, there's a cyberspace, there's the internet. It's really cool. People take profit of it, right? People build something on top of it. It's like the internet boom after 2000. There's a lot of company IPO, a lot of money get into this space. That's a little bit like the East India Company trying to colonize every place they found out, right? The second stage, which is what we are experiencing right now, is the huge conglomerates of the IT giants are now trying to take over different places. Like, oh, we are the fintech giants. We're the social giants. Like Facebook is the social giant, so we are taking over, like just some part of the cyberspace. Just like the colonized United States. Before the United States, they colonized certain states. They have different, owner, different, people to control it. And then the third stage, I think that is the Web 3.0. A lot of people ask me, what is Web 3.0? Like, why it's related with Web 2? Why it's related with Internet? I think the real Web 3.0, in my opinion, the ownership, in my opinion, is the independence. It's independence, and there's some kind of revolution that the people of the cyberspace now actually have the governance right of the cyberspace they live in or their assets are residing, right? So that stage is right now, and we're just entering that stage. We see some very interesting experiments. This morning we saw the founder of the Ethereum Vitalik give you some very interesting thought experiments. So what we are at this stage right now. All right, next stage. Okay. Yeah. So what we are the stage right now is the concept of network state just spawned like to us last year, but this is not really a new concept. So a small explanation of network state that a lot of the crypto people, like Balaj is the writer of the author of the network state, and other like core people and OG believe that we are transitioning the power from the state to the network. Just like I mentioned, I think cyberspace is independent space. Just like the North America is a new continent. So we migrate from the old continent to new continent, and we see people conquering different places. Now we ask for the independence. We ask for to form our own governance. So that process, we may lead to the so-called network state, right? We may have a governance system on the internet. We may have like netizen, which is the internet citizen. But this is not really a new concept, even though the book is just released like last year. The crypto community is relatively new, only like 3-5 years old to think about this concept. This is not really a new concept. The year I was born, 1996. Okay, this is 2014 from Julian Assange. That he mentioned the word is not sliding, but pretty bad. Into a new transnational dystopia. The internet, our greatest tool for has been transformed into the most dangerous. It's pretty bad words. This is like 2012, and when Julian Assange eventually published this book in 2014, it soon get translated into many languages, because at that time most of the government don't think that's a real thing. They just think, oh, this is just a book. But now, if you read again, this is pretty. I think it's pretty true that now the internet we have today is a threat to the human civilization. So yeah, we are at this stage. We are at the interesting stage that we want to build something different, but how can we do that, right? We have this theory that, okay, the internet should be independent, we should have some independent power over top of it, but how can we do that? And what's the plan, what's the roadmap? So yeah, I think the first roadmap is still, you have to have some organization. You start an NGO or start a company, and the company is still the best way to form kind of like organization that people can contribute in, can have some benefit in. And then you start your own community. That's basically related to some proof that you are part of the community, right? That in the traditional nation state, this proof is called passport, right? You have a passport, oh, we are this community member, we have this passport, we have this ID. In the cyberspace, it can be different. It can be a token, it can be an NFT. As long as you can identify this address, this guy is a community member, then we just give them a proof, right? It can be a soulbound token. And then the next thing is like, start your own currency. So this thing may become valuable, just like we may, like this afternoon we're gonna see the very historical, meaningful currency. You can start it in your mind. You don't need to have it. Once you have a community, people think, oh, this is a valuable asset, this is a valuable thing, you can transfer between transactions between people, then you start your own currency, then you start your own country. I think that's, theoretically, that's gonna work, right? And that's, hopefully that's gonna work, but we're gonna break down the details. We're gonna have like a lot of like process, a lot of like roadmaps, one by one, how to do that. So now the AI is the production force. Web 2.0 is like, as mentioned, the production relations that whoever control the data, the asset, and someone need to pay your own invented currency to your own unique asset. Eventually, we're gonna have this kind of interesting relationship. And the last 5 years after the launch of Ethereum, after the ICO bubble, we are now in the stage of pretty much decentralized finance. That we're gonna have the stable coin, and we're gonna have everything interesting. So in the new cyberspace now, pretty much that we have the new New York City, really. We're in the new cyberspace. It's pretty much like the new North America, and we have New York City, but we don't have the next state yet. We don't have the governance yet. So which lead to the governance need to have a lot of people, a lot of conversation, a lot of like, and including entertainment. So that require more communication. Unfortunately, our communication is still, mostly centralized, right? Mostly controlled by Facebook, Twitter. So that's the next stage. I think we're gonna be on. That Lego gonna go to the next level. We're gonna have the decentralized social media. We're gonna have decentralized entertainment. We're gonna mimic the birth of like Hollywood, but in a decentralized manner. That time we're gonna have our own country. So that's what we did as a company, as a project. Mass Network is focused on the decentralized social media. But we learned a lot from the historical comparison, historical examples. This is the historical example that every Chinese probably know that. Dr. Sun Yat-sen, he's the first Chinese guy who did ICO actually. So yeah, really, because he's famous for raising money, right? And he print money out of nowhere and sign like, sign his name, and it's like Chinese Revolution bond, Chinese Revolution coin. If you buy the Chinese Revolution coin in 1895. And he promised to put the money into his fund, DAO. And he also promised to generate NFT, which is very famous. Mingbao that time was like a famous NFT. And he promised to use all these things to generate the next value. So again, it's very easy. Start a company, start a DAO, then you start a community. People treat your community very seriously. They're gonna buy your asset, buy your currency. Then you put your currency together to generate something unique. Like, cyberspace, AI, and Web3 is very unique. You cannot buy any other, in any other place, you cannot buy AI. You can only buy AI in cyberspace. So you generate something unique, then you start a movement. You start something, have like a social and cultural goal. So just like Dr. Sun said, he has his own goal about the Chinese Revolution, which is eventually, I think, quite successful. He spent like 15 years. I think he almost did it. Right? So, yeah. And that's what we are doing right now. Is like we figure out that we are at the stage that the financial level is almost ready. We almost have the financial freedom in the decentralized space. Everyone can see on-ramp, buy some Bitcoin, Ethereum, DeFi, trade, collateralize, lending, very easy. But the governance level is not ready. And also the discussion about the social consensus and the social contract is not ready. You need decentralized social media. Otherwise, your valuable discussion about the social construction going to be deleted by Twitter, by or whatever, right? So that's very important. And then next level going to be the cultural movement that we're going to appreciate the culture created by the community. We're going to appreciate the importance, and that's the next level. In order to do that, we also have like a fund, mostly our own money and our friends' money, try to just invest and help those people who are trying to do this revolution. Yeah, so again, a quote from Julia Assange that I don't want to read it again, but it's really interesting. Very interesting article, not long. You guys probably gonna take a look. And this is what I believe. This is a quote from the 1996 EFF founder, John Peter Barron. His famous statement, his famous Declaration of Independence of Cyberspace. I think we're gonna see the independence of cyberspace in my lifetime, and in our next generation or next generation, we're gonna see the new governance of cyberspace come into our life. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Suji. Thorough discussion and exploration of the network state movement. So as we are short on time, we'll take one quick question. Suji is a really, really influential and helpful investor and founder in the space. This is your chance. Yes.
Hi, Suji, nice to meet you. So I used mask.io before as an extension for Twitter, so now it's X. So I used that to try to invite my friend on Twitter and also try to do some giveaway kind of events. And also since right now Zuckerberg is trying to stealing users to another social platform called Threads. And also I tried another decentralized social network called Demus. So do you think you regard Mask as one of the potential competitors in terms of the social network, in terms of onboarding Web2 users into Web3? Because right now a lot of Web2 users still feel a little bit scared about jumping to Web3 world. And if you are going to do a social network for Mask, what would you do?
I think right now the whole decentralized social network space is quite small. The whole population is just like 1 million. And it's 1 million user. And I think the key is to turn the user into citizen. That's the key. Because users, you're never gonna have enough users, right? Like Facebook have a few billion, I think 4 billion user. Twitter have 2 to 3 billion user. Every internet giants, every company have huge user base, but they just treat user actually as slaves, right? It's kind of cyber feudalism, right? It's this is the Facebook kingdom, this is the Twitter kingdom. We have different kings. Sometimes they fight, sometimes they're friends. I think the very important key is to somehow to enlighten the user, to let them to know they are citizens, they're the network state, whatever citizens. Ethereum did a great job, Bitcoin did a great job. It's too small. And for social and cultural and extended movement, you're gonna able to just bring more users, into citizens. So I think the goal is not to say, hey, we're going to compete as giants on the user numbers. Say, hey, they got 1 billion, we got 500 million. That's not how it works. How it works is oh, they got 1 billion users, but we're able to convert 0.1%, 0.1% them into citizens. Once they're into citizens, they start to ask, oh, can I have my own key? Can I control my own data? And then they're going to start to do other things oh, I want to collateralize my Twitter data, and I want to lend some stable coin. Can I do that? And there's no bank allowed to do that in the physical world. There's only the bank in the cyberspace allow you to do that, right? Then they're gonna open an account in the cyberspace, and they're gonna do other things. They're gonna say, hey, I have an AI, AI agent. Maybe I want this AI be my girlfriend. Can I do that? There's no physical state can allow that, but there will be more interesting state like Palau. There's more interesting space allow this kind of experiments. So these users will become citizens. And then you don't need a lot of citizens. Singapore only have 5 million, right? And here it's much more smaller, but as long as you have a core community, then what you will have diplomacy. You will have something very different than a company. That's the core. Once the conversion rate become much more higher, you're gonna have diplomacy over the new state and Facebook. I think that's the goal we're trying to do. I think Damus and the Nostr doing a great job, but overall it's very early. Overall, I think the total total interested people and engineers in the field is still quite small. Especially right now, it's kind of bear market. So I think still a huge chance to do. I don't think we are competitors. It's too early to just do any competitive, anything to compete. It's just too early, but it's very promising area. Yeah.
Thank you, Suji. As you can tell, the first block of session in the afternoon, we are exploring decentralized governance. How do you actually govern a decentralized community, and how can this decentralized community actually help and move and change the world? So that comes to the next speaker, Marcus Aurelius, the core contributor of ClimaDAO, which is the largest climate DAO in the whole world that has facilitated billions of carbon credit on chain, and all from the power of decentralized community. The talk title is Decentralized Governance, exploring for the digital carbon market. So let's welcome Marcus.
Hello everyone. It's great to be with you here in beautiful Palau. So normally I start my talks by giving an overview of the scale and scope required to address the climate issue. Here in Palau, I think the urgency is self-evident. Between rising sea levels, ocean acidification, and the warming of our planet, it's clear that the time to act is now. So instead I'm going to jump right in and give an overview of how the carbon markets work today and how we're using decentralized governance and Web3 technology to drive change in that market to have greater scale and more impact. The first thing I want to say is I'm going to speak about carbon markets, but the general principles I'm discussing here could apply to other environmental assets that address other aspects of our exceeded planetary boundaries, such as biodiversity, plastic pollution, etc. But carbon is the most mature environmental asset market out there, so I'm going to focus on that today. I've got 4 broad points, we'll see if I get to all of them, where I think decentralization can serve a role in addressing some of the issues that have existed in traditional carbon markets. The first is disintermediation, which is a fancy word, but it really means something quite simple, which is that in a supply chain where an asset is being produced, whether that's corn or apples or carbon credits, there are a variety of different players in the market. And depending on the market structure, you can advance the slides, please. Depending on the market structure, a lot of the value flowing through these systems can end up being captured by intermediaries who are not directly involved in the underlying economic activity. So this is sort of our oh, there we go. It's working now. It's all good. So this is going to be our map for today. It's a structure of the voluntary carbon market. Just briefly, I'll go over this. So in the top half, we have the supply side of the market, which is where the assets are created. And there's really 3 key players. The most important is the project developers. They're the people on the ground doing the work, planting trees, installing solar panels, whatever the particular activity is. And then you have a registry or standards body that establishes the rules for the game. How do you actually issue these credits? And they serve as a standards body. Finally, you have the validation and verification bodies, and they check the work of the project developer to make sure that they followed the methodology appropriately. I'll get into what a methodology is momentarily. And then on the bottom, we have the demand side, which is where end users who want to support climate action are putting money into the system, and in return, they're getting to make a claim saying, I supported this particular type of project. I supported protecting the Amazon rainforest, or I supported protecting Palau's beautiful marine ecosystems. So in terms of what disintermediation means, I want to start with a simple example. If you go into the grocery store and you buy, say, an apple, that apple was delivered to you from a farmer, but that farmer first sold it to a wholesaler who buys, say, millions of apples. That wholesaler then sold it to a grocery store, and that grocery store then sold it on to you. Conversely, if you go to something like the Karora Night Market, which happened last night, you could buy directly from a farmer who produced some bananas, say. And that money that you put into the farmer's hand is going directly toward the person who produced that good. That's the concept of disintermediation. Now, in the carbon markets, traditionally they've been highly intermediated. There are lots of financial players sitting in between the producers, the project developers, and the end users who want to support those projects. And we believe, and we've built technology that uses decentralized finance to disintermediate the financial structure of the carbon markets and get more of the money into the hands of the project developers. So returning to this slide, you can see there's an additional arrow which connects the buyers directly with the project developers rather than going through a complex set of intermediaries. And in particular, we built an application where instead of calling someone on the phone, going back and forth over email, settling via a bank transfer, you can go online and see the projects that are available and directly put money into the hands of the project developers. This has dramatically reduced the amount of time it takes to get the credits and settle the transaction. It's also reduced the amount of fees and the fragmentation in the market, so that instead of going around to 3 or 4 different brokers, calling people on the phone for weeks, you can go online and see exactly the projects available and decide which one you want to support. And finally, rather than the transaction record being an email, the transaction record in this case is a transparent on-chain record that is there forever. You can share it on your social media pages, and there's no ambiguity about the fact that you supported that particular project. So like I said, we built this product called Carbon Mark that is very familiar if you've ever shopped on Amazon or a similar e-commerce website. You go onto carbonmark.com, you see the different projects that are available, you select which one you want to support, and you can check out with a credit card. Or if you have a crypto wallet, you can also check out using your standard crypto wallet software. Moving on to methodology development. So His Excellency the President this morning talked about how money in Palauan culture derives its value from the stories that are told about that money, whether it's the rhinestones or the turtle shells. And similarly, carbon credits derive their value from the stories that are told about them. And in particular, a methodology is basically a scientific story that has a specific set of steps that the project developer needs to follow. And if they follow those steps and a third party checks that they actually did follow the steps appropriately, they are allowed to issue carbon credits, and that story is what gives the carbon credits their value. But unfortunately, methodology development has historically been a very slow and very closed-door process, where you need to go to a standards body, you submit a bunch of documents to them in private, and there is a public consultation phase, but most of the process happens behind closed doors. And so I think there's a big opportunity in methodology development to really open up that process. So here we're focusing on the top left part of our diagram. There's a lot of different types of methodologies. I don't have time to go into them, but if you're curious about different methodologies, I'm happy to talk about that over the next few days. But we've heard a lot about blue carbon, which is a methodology for protecting or restoring marine ecosystems. You could plant trees is another very popular methodology for removing carbon through tree planting, as well as switching to renewable energy or other changes to industrial processes that reduce emissions. I know the Palau Ocean Foundation is busy developing a blue carbon credit methodology, working with some of the existing standards like Vera. It's a long, slow process. And I think that decentralized governance has a role to play in both speeding up that process and ensuring that all stakeholders have a say in the process of developing a new methodology. So this is a sample I took from one of the Vera documents where you can see the different stages of methodology development. And there's really 2 key points I want to make here. One is that only one phase of this process involves the public. All of the other phases happen in private between the Vera staff and the methodology developer. And so I think there's a big opportunity to open up that process, have it be more public, and involve more stakeholders. And finally, the last stage of this process is that Vera either approves or rejects the methodology. And the issue here is that no methodology is perfect. They need to change over time. And we have to recognize that those changes don't necessarily undermine the value of the work that went into the projects developed under the first version of the methodology. So I think this process needs to be more circular, where we recognize the need for continual improvement, and we accept that methodologies will evolve over time. So I've coined this notion of Murphy's Law for methodologies. No methodology is perfect, therefore all methodologies will be criticized, and we shouldn't run away from that. We should embrace the fact that methodologies need to evolve over time. Another exciting area for decentralized governance that's more directly related to the work KlimaDAO is doing is around supporting new projects in a way that's more open and transparent than traditional project financing. So these activities are highly capital intensive. It can take millions of dollars to start up a new carbon credit project. And typically the way these projects are funded is through bilateral agreements, where a financer works with the project developer to provide capital. And once that capital has been provided, a few years go by, and hopefully the project succeeds and they issue their carbon credits. One of the things that we've been able to do through our decentralized governance mechanism at KlimaDAO is to support new projects in public. So here we're focusing on the right side of the diagram, where new projects receive financing. Most of that financing today comes from the same financial intermediaries that sit in between the project developer and the end user. And we think that public governance mechanisms and communities can play a more important role in funding new projects. So we have a governance forum on which anyone can come and post a proposal requesting funds or support from the KlimaDAO community. So we recently had a project called LimeNet come to us. They're working on a very exciting new methodology. Don't have a ton of time to get into it, but basically they are trying to accelerate the natural process of the ocean absorbing CO2 in a way that both benefits the local marine life by reducing the acidification in a local area where the change is made, and also draws more carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere where it can be sequestered in the ocean for millions of years. Hundreds of thousands of years according to the scientific research. So this group partnered with Aether. Aether is a project developer that works with projects like LimeNet. And they came to our governance forum, forum.klimadao.finance, and requested funding for a pilot program that they're running to carry out this project. And the really interesting thing about this governance process is it's fully public. Anyone can see what's going on. You can go onto this site and comment, ask questions, and really we're doing a diligence process. We're evaluating, is this project likely to have a positive impact on the issues that we care about, which for KlimaDAO is climate change, as opposed to a traditional funding mechanism where it all happens behind closed doors. Nobody knows what diligence was done, if any. And once the project is funded, they do a press release and they say, hey, we deployed $10 million to this project, but you don't necessarily know why, what process they went through to evaluate the project. Whereas because we're doing this all in public on a governance forum on the internet, you can see what questions were asked, you can ask questions yourself, and if any other funder wants to go and support that type of project, they have a record to look at and say, oh, you know, KlimaDAO funded ocean alkalinity enhancement, which is the fancy term for this type of project. We can go and ask the same questions to the project we're considering supporting and make sure that they're able to provide reasonable answers and address those issues. This is a diagram of how that methodology works. I'm happy to go over this more if you're curious. So we've already done 2 of these projects. That one I mentioned from LimeNet is still an open governance proposal. We have not decided yet whether we're going to be supporting that project. So if you're interested, you can get involved in the discussion on our forum. But we did already fund 2 projects. So one is KIP 32, where we funded a cook stove project in Bangladesh. We deployed $250,000 worth of USDC stablecoins to that project, which is providing more efficient cook stoves to refugees in a refugee camp in Bangladesh. We also supported an reforestation project where they're restoring forests in a degraded forest reserve in Africa. And that was 227,000 USDC. My final point is another fancy term called interoperability. And the basic concept here is pretty straightforward. It really affects the whole market in that there's a lot of new projects coming in, a lot of new players entering this space. It's a very exciting time in the carbon markets. But that's also led to a massive explosion in the complexity of the space. I hope you can't read any of this. It is really ridiculous how many different companies there are doing different things in the space. And this is creating a lot of confusion on all sides of the market. The project developers don't know which registries to work with. The buyers don't know what kind of projects they should be supporting. And what we really need is some standardization so that different projects can interact with each other in a more streamlined way. An analogy here would be the different plugs that we've all dealt with when we're traveling internationally, whether that's the different types of USB plugs or power outlets. The nice thing is that there is some level of interoperability among these different plugs. We can create universal travel adapters where regardless whether you have a US style plug, a UK style plug, or an EU style plug, you can plug it into the universal power adapter and it will just work. We need something like that for carbon markets, And at ClimaDAO, we're working with a lot of our partners to develop these kind of interoperable standards. This is a sort of diagram showing the ecosystem that we've built, and the main point here is that we're trying to abstract away that complexity so that each player can decide, where do I sit in the market, what type of work am I trying to do, and regardless of which player I'm working with in the rest of the market, I can assume that things will work. So just some key benefits. Disintermediation gets more of the money to people on the ground, the people here in Palau, for instance, who will be implementing the blue carbon projects we've heard so much about. We need to mitigate Murphy's Law for methodologies and recognize that methodologies will need to change over time. Communities can publicly support new projects, which gives a more robust diligence process. And finally, interoperability helps to simplify a very complex space. So if you have any questions, feel free to get in touch. There's a link to my slides up there. Yeah, I'll be here all week. Feel free to get in touch.
Thank you.
All right, Marcus, thank you for this talk. As Palau is an island nation, we do care about sustainability a lot. And as Palau also champions on the ocean conservation and a lot of this natural conservation efforts, we do notice that and we realize that our ocean here is a really fantastic source of value. And how do we actually now engage our digital resident community to actually do some changes here in the island is something that we really care about. So thank you for sharing that. And I want to ask if audience has one question before we move to the panel of all these network state decentralized government experts. One question for Marcus. What?
Thank you, Max. Very inspiring sharing. So I have a question about is ClimaDAO or your team can help allow if there's a lot of aqua farming projects, and how can help to calculate the carbon emission, and they can know how much carbon credits they need to offset this kind of related projects, because we are at very initial point to launching alpha farming project. Yeah, that's my question. Thank you.
Yeah, so I think what you're asking about is life cycle carbon analysis, which is honestly a fairly complex subject. How do you estimate the emissions associated with a particular activity? We do have some calculators I can point you to that for well-known activities like airfare and running a business help to estimate the emissions. And then through CarbonMark, our platform, you can choose which projects you want to support and compensate for those emissions. The other thing that comes to mind, because you mentioned it, is we sit on the demand side of the market. We're helping to connect end users directly with the projects. And so what I'd love to see is once Palau starts issuing carbon credits under a blue carbon credit methodology or similar, that we're able to list those credits alongside the other projects that we already support and allow people to directly support the people here on the ground in Palau.
Thank you.
Thank you, Marcus. So stay here because we are going to have a panel. How do you govern a decentralized community? So if we can start moving chairs.
Yes, they're coming with the chairs.
So on the panel we have Anastasia again, and we have Suji, and we have Marcus, and we have Nico-san from Zuzuru. All of them represents different kind of a decentralized community, and then they leverage the power of decentralized community to actually start making impact in this world. So now we can ask them, how do they actually govern their huge decentralized community, and how can Palau learn from them, because we also have a huge number of digital resident community. So I will leave the microphone to them. Okay.
Thank you so much. Thank you, and hello again. And it's great that we will now have a chance to dive a bit deeper into questions we were burning to ask of these wonderful people, who I will introduce or reintroduce first, because we've spoken from all of them. But just as a little reminder, we have Marcus Aurelius from ClimaDAO, we have Suji Yang from Mass Network, and we have Nicole Sam from Zuzalo. So before we dive in, I just wanted to note how amazing this moment is, where we have 3 instances of very different communities, where governance is actually in full bloom in terms of how experimental that could be. We're actually forging a new way in so many areas, just to see what experiments we could have, and it's fun. And so I would like to ask a few questions of you guys, but then of course open it up to the public so we can investigate together about what the potential of governance is. And where to state, even though we work with governments that are more traditional, we work a lot with communities that are emerging. And this work, I must admit, is way more exciting because here we can really play and experiment more boldly. So I would like to start with you, Nicole. And I would like to invite you to share a story of how Zuzalo came about. And were you thinking in terms of governance back then, or you just wanted to bring the people you like and enjoy being with, and then it turned out to be something that could be a new governance model of the work?
Yeah, so, is this on? Okay. Hello? Let's make it closer. Is it on?
No.
Yeah, yes. It's on? Okay.
When you see the red light, is there just the red light?
Sorry about that. So how Zuzalo got started, it was initially, I was at breakfast with DevCon, with Vitalik at DevCon, so this was last November, and we were talking about the hacker houses I used to throw. So I met him at a hacker house and started inviting him to the hacker houses I used to throw, and he would come quite regularly. So in Korea he visited, and we met him in DevCon, and I think our takeaway was that these hacker houses are really magical. Like you have 20, 30 people, they're all hacking, but you really get to know each other and you really become friends, co-living together and co-working. And we were like, okay, how do we scale this up in a way that's functional? And so we slowly came to the idea of Zuzalo. I think he'd been tinkering with the idea of digital tribes for a very long time, but Zuzalo was the first time we actually wanted to try this out in person. What does this look like? How can we bring together a larger number of people for a longer period of time? So we settled on 200 people. So this is like a little over Dunbar's number, but enough that you get like different fields all incorporated and well represented for 2 months, which is a bit longer than your typical conference. And it was a really quick slur from when we first came to the event to us actually hosting the event. There was only like 2 months, so we pulled together the whole event in 2 months. We chose our venue, Montenegro, really in like a short period of time. We just determined that they had everything we needed and we just ran with it. So yeah, we started our event in March, started planning officially in January. At first we were like, okay, let's just meet some new people. Let's invite one person from each field to help us invite people in that field. And that way we got to meet a lot more new people and it wasn't biased to our existing network. And then we realized that, okay, we're gonna need some form of governance here. It's just like a needs-based thing. At first we were just a small core team of 4, but then we were like, we cannot be making decisions for everyone that comes, right? So we ended up having town halls every single week at Zuzalo. So every Tuesday we'd bring together everyone, we'd sit together. There'd be a short agenda that the core team wanted to run through, and then we'd just open it up to everyone to give us a lot of feedback on like, hey, like this is what we should be experimenting with. Hey, I'd like a say here. So I think our governance was very much rudimentary. We didn't start with something in mind. It was ground up of what people needed. And I thought that worked out pretty well. Like for example, all of our core team members are like globally distributed, but we were lacking a representative from Africa. One of our core members, Janine, is from South Africa, but she doesn't live there now. So we actually talked to more of the Afropolitan team, so they're like a network state based out of Africa. And they were like, hey, like if we had someone on the core team, we would have done this a bit differently. So through meeting more people in our community, we ended up realizing like there's a big need for governance. And now we're still settling on like what are we gonna run with. We don't have like a governance token. We don't want to ever release a token, but we do need a way of like taking into account everyone's opinions. So we still run these town halls every week online, virtually, and that's been what we found works best, like just getting feedback from the people directly, not having like layers of obfuscation of how things work. So yeah, that's how we do things currently.
Okay, and do you recognize, Nicole, your potential role in creating governance in these spaces? I know it hasn't started with that intention in mind, but now that you are who you are where you are, you know, these things will probably get replicated and multiplied. Do you want to use this space to actually throw out some blueprints for others to follow, just because you can?
like right now.
Not necessarily DAO, but just anything that just come up with something new in governance sense.
We had like some very interesting people who had proposed like different ideas. Like, I don't know if I'm competent to come up with like a new governance model right now, but I thought it was very interesting that we were more like populist in nature, and we got a lot of different results once we started being more ZK. So we were privacy preserving in everything we did, from polling to getting feedback, etc. I think that was kind of a new thing that we experimented with, is letting people give their opinions completely anonymous, and also experimenting with how we took in feedback. So some people did really well in the town hall setting of like speaking up, but that was usually dominated by like a small subset of more extroverted people. So then we had to try like different methods of meeting people and getting their feedback on governance. So we had like ZK polling online, that's best for introverts, and we also had like small meetings where we would grab 10 random people, and we would do this weekly, with each person now being requested to host the next one. So we would be the first ones to start off this chain of like, hey, like, what do you want out of Zuzlu? How do you think we should run Zuzlu? But then the people that are part of this first one would host that workshop. And that kind of worked out so that people like me aren't in charge of doing the governance. We just source ideas from everyone in the community. And yeah, like people chose different ways of how they hosted their weekly panel of 10 people. Like some people brought people to their houses, cooked together, and asked them for feedback. Some people did more formal virtual stuff. So yeah, I think I want to decentralize myself and not be the person that's responsible for coming up with these new models, but handing that off to different people and experimenting.
Yeah, sure. No, I didn't mean you personally, even though that would be an interesting one. But I mean, are there efforts to actually solicit and crowdsource these ideas? Because I think, many ideas are looking for a space to get implemented. From that perspective, I thought maybe you want to open yourself up to some. I'm sure this will be going on later, but thank you so much. And Suji, I'd like to ask you, since network states was something that was discussed in Zuzalo and being discussed around the world right now, what is your take on the various recipes of governance for the network states? Because even in Zuzalo we saw, let me say, two schools of thought. That was classical Pelagian network state, that is, around a particular issue, with some physical land or not. So it was like a very particular model. But then there was another approach that emerged that's called coordinations, where this was more around broader societal vision. It was an emergence of several projects coming together, so it's more collaborative in nature. And the idea was that network states should not be defined by just Pelagian vision, but there are so many other recipes for success. How do you see the future of network states in terms of different ways in which it could be governed?
Yeah, I mean, like, the technology is new. Like, the technology we have in blockchain or Web3 is new, but I think the people in the industry have, lack a little bit about understanding the past, the history, right? This is not new. I mean, evolving a new country is not new. I mean, it's new in our lifetime, because in our lifetime, there's probably not really a lot of countries get independence, but it's not really new in this century. And this example of Singapore is only 70 years old, and it get kicked out by other country. Okay, it's not really say they want really 100% independence. They kick out. There's in the past 200 years, and even in the past 300 years, the form of independent countries and the development of industrialization and capitalism are together. So I think what I learned from the process, and after interacting with many people, is like, I think we need to take a serious look into the history, take a serious look into the historical examples. Like, for example, the question, the discussion in Zuzalo and many other places about whether we need a physical place, whether we need, like Pelage version or not. I think if you look into the history, won't ask this question, because like the original idea of independent cyberspace is from 1996, the EFF version, and then they quote a lot of the founding fathers' language, the American founding father language, and then you look back into the founding father language, and they actually want something, not really just lands, they want something they can control their tax, right? I think that's a fundamental. Like, when we doing a transaction on chain, we actually paying the tax through the gas fee to the governments we recognize. So that's why some institutional users don't want to use Tron, because they don't want to contribute to, right? So I think that's a fundamental thing. Compared to the land, you should ask questions about tax, about who is running the lands, right? I think by looking into the history, we've been able to find very interesting historical comparison. We're going to find those masterpieces, those great minds. They asked similar questions in the past, even though the situation is very different, the technology is very different, but I mean, people is always the same. That's something I learned. I think, I was always using those historical examples. I think that will gonna guide us really to the network state, to what kind of land state or kind of like independent state that's gonna come in. Yeah, that's my personal feeling. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And talking about historical examples, to what extent do you think, we who like to think about or even apply the network states ideas, to what extent we have to try and work with legacy systems and, for example, Montevideo Convention of 1937, I believe, defines what it means to be a country or a nation. I would argue hugely outdated because it requires you to have a land, it requires you to have shared language, it requires you to have all these things that sort of matter less these days. Now, what do we do with it? It was 100 years ago when it was coined, it was never revisited. Do you think we will be, will we need to interact with those, try to change them, or we just create a parallel system and see what is more appealing?
I think we need all these, and again, I can answer a question through historical comparison. I mean, for example, Palau is very new. Montenegro is also very new, 20, 30 years old. There's many countries, they feel a little bit older, but it's actually quite new, 70 years old, Singapore. Answer your question, the American founding fathers, among them, there's one interesting guy, Benjamin Franklin. And I think he loved Paris more than Philadelphia. He loved London more than Philadelphia. And he's in his our lifetime, his early days and until he's 50, 60, he recognized himself as a citizen of the great British Empire. And then he realized, okay, the fucking king is trying to tax us. I don't like the tax. So he went to France. And he went to London for 10 years. He went to France, Paris for the rest of his life, right? And he's not refusing to talk to the royal family of France. So that, this really similar concept of the Hong Kong blockchain thing, because a lot of people, because I'm Chinese, right? A lot of people ask me, hey, Suji, what do you think about the Hong Kong blockchain thing, right? I told them, Benjamin Franklin's largest, one of his greatest achievement is he's realistic enough to went to Paris and to meet the royal family. That time, the largest dictator, the King Louis, and then he tell the King Louis, I know you don't care about the independence, whatever, but you care about to kick the ass of the British. So give us money and gun. Then he bring it back to win the victory of independence. I think that's important. So that's my opinion. When people ask me about Hong Kong blockchain, whatever, I was thinking about Benjamin Franklin in Paris, right? That when people ask me about the conversation between the traditional governments and the modern South, I was thinking when in the early days of Benjamin Franklin, he still believed he's a loyal member of the royal family to the royal family of the British Kingdom. So yeah, people are gonna change. It's gonna be a transitional process. In our lifetime, our view is gonna change, but just as the transition goes inside us, the transition then goes across the world as well. So yeah, I think that's going to be a great answer.
Thank you. Interesting times, are they not? Really exciting. Marcus, could you also share, because you guys, and thank you for your wonderful presentation, you are effectively building a new blueprint for governance beyond doubt. Could you talk to us about the transparency and inclusivity aspects of what you do? And to what extent, you want this to become new emerging practice, and maybe you could give some specific examples of how you do it.
Yeah, so the traditional carbon markets rely a lot on word of mouth and talking to each other over the phone. So at a certain level, out of the box, just by running on chain, we get a lot of those benefits of public transaction records, permissionless access that on the traditional rails just aren't readily available. In terms of specific examples where the greater transparency and inclusivity, I think, demonstrates its power. I mentioned in my talk about the need for methodologies to evolve over time. And there have been some examples of methodologies that have fallen out of favor for one reason or another. And there's a particular methodology to do with the production of refrigerant gases, which have a very strong, there's a byproduct of the production of refrigerant gases that have a very strong warming effect, greenhouse gas effect. And there was a methodology developed way back in the 90s in the first generation of the carbon markets, which would pay factories to install a piece of equipment that would destroy this byproduct and therefore reduce the greenhouse gas associated with it, greenhouse gas effect associated with it. And over time, some issues were identified with the methodology. Particular projects were gaming the system, taking advantage of the methodology the way it was originally written. And the carbon markets never really figured out a way to cleanly move on from this methodology. So, at a certain point in 2014, the major registry said that no new projects would be able to issue under this existing methodology. It's called HFC 23. The byproducts, I'll just refer to it as the HFC 23 methodology. And so these credits were sitting out there for a decade, being used to some extent to make claims, but sort of sitting idle on the books. And there wasn't a mechanism under the traditional registry structure to destroy these credits and help the market move on. Instead, they would just sit out there. And it was sort of a constant concern of, is another media piece going to come out about this methodology? And so some of these credits made their way on chain during ClimaDAO's launch. And as we began to understand the problem, I conducted some data analysis and figured out that these particular credits were no longer being used. Back in 2014, the methodology had been deprecated, but the credits were never destroyed. And so using our public governance process, we actually, I posted a proposal, we went through the process of diligencing and voting on the proposal, and then we destroyed about 700,000 tons of this HFC 23 methodology credits. And so now those credits are destroyed once and for all. We can cleanly move on. And I think this is a really important mechanism that the broader carbon markets need to develop for how we deal with methodologies that once were thought to be effective and doing good. As I want to be clear, destroying HFC 23 is a really important thing to be doing at the time. It's just that things changed and that methodology was no longer appropriate. And I think that decentralized governance, through greater inclusiveness and transparency of what's going on, has the potential to address the need for methodologies to evolve over time.
Thank you. And since you are operating in such a fast evolving space, how do you keep up with that change, with that pace of change? How do you learn? How do you make sure that you remain, on top of the game when it comes to ever-changing governance processes?
Yeah, it's not easy. One of the things that we have the advantage of is that we have a community of tens of thousands of people all over the world, and they're tapped into what's going on. So we have some channels in our Discord chat server where people are raising latest developments in the carbon markets, discussing the implications. And if there is a need to take action, the governance process is permissionless, right? Anybody can go and post a proposal and say, hey, I think this methodology isn't appropriate anymore, we should do something about it, or hey, I heard about this new project, we should integrate with them. So basically by casting a wide net and having a lot of different stakeholders involved in the process, we're much better positioned to keep up with the changing landscape than say a centrally controlled top-down corporation where any change needs to be approved by the CEO or the board. That really slows things down and leads to a sort of tunnel vision, focus on what are we doing today and how can we do it, how can we do that more, instead of being open to new possibilities.
Thank you so much. Now let me ask one question to all three of you, because I'm very curious to hear your answer to that, and then we can probably open it to questions from the audience. I want to ask you, a very simple, straightforward question. What does future of governance look like to you?
I guess my answer here is, I don't know. I think it's going to be very, very, we'll have different schools of thought, and there's going to be a lot more research done into each different type. So, as you pointed out, Primavera's coordination is vastly different from Balaji's network state. I think we'll see more of these new ideas come about and more in-depth discussion of what works best. And we'll see in real life experiments that verify what seems to work, what doesn't seem to work. So my answer is we'll see, because
a particular vision, what would you like for it to be?
I don't think I speak for any of the existing ones. I don't think any of them are perfect yet. Yeah. So I think we're still far from seeing something that's fully functional. But in our experiments, we'll see. I think we'll actually like get to live through this entire process in this part of history.
I think the method is going to be different, but the goal is the same. Like a quote from Lincoln: "The government of the people, by the people, for the people, should never perish from the earth." Yeah.
Yeah, the way I'm thinking about the future of governance is that right now we have some very strong defaults. So for instance, if you're governing a country, the default is one person, one vote. If you're governing a DAO, for a long time, the default has been one token, one vote. And now we're seeing the emergence of things that fit in between on that spectrum. For instance, Gitcoin uses quadratic voting and quadratic funding, which strikes a balance between giving everyone equal power and giving people with more financial capital a greater voice. We also see approaches like Optimism's bicameral governance process, where some decisions are made through a one person, one vote decision-making process, and other decisions are made through a one token, one vote. So I really think the future of governance is that the governance mechanism for a given project will be tailored and made appropriate for the particular scope of problem that that governance system is trying to solve. And if you're governing a nation, maybe a democratic system of one person, one vote is more appropriate. If you're governing a financial system, then you need to have some way of representing the fact that people with more financial capital have more of a stake in the future of that system than people with less. So I think it's really going to be about learning the lessons from how governance has worked in the past and tailoring each governance system to the particular community and problem set that that governance system is trying to solve.
Fabulous, thank you so much. I think it would be a good time to take questions from the audience.
Thank you everyone for wonderful sharing. And I actually had a question for Nicole. So you mentioned that like Zuzulu actually invites one person from each domain. Although they may come from different backgrounds, but they share similar interests and also mindsets because they're willing to share and willing to contribute together. But I was wondering, like, have you considered that we need to break the echo chamber one day? Because, like, after all, if we want everyone to adopt crypto technology one day for everyone in the world, there are like 7 billion people out there. We need to break the echo chamber outside the box. Like, because I used to work in media kind of industry, I know how hard it is to break this echo chamber because people within the echo chamber, they would reinforce each other's concepts, but people are wired differently. So I would love to have heard about your idea. Thank you.
You mean like crypto as the echo chamber, right?
Kind of, yes.
Yeah. So I guess for Zuzulu this time around, we weren't just crypto only. So crypto was one of the big focuses, but another was longevity and broadly decentralized science. So like we had, our entire first week was ran by this entire thing called like the SynBio Beta team. So they did synthetic biology and they brought in like wonderful professors like Drew Andy, and they have zero understanding of crypto. Like they were there for the synthetic bio and it was awesome. And I think you're completely correct and we should have done more of that because that week, like even Vitalik, we were learning new things for the first time. It completely broke the mold of like a typical crypto conference, which only has like everyone geeking out about like ZK tech. This time we like thought about cells for the first time in a very long time. So I think we should do more of that, and that's like a direction we're moving more for Zuzulu, is actually having new tracks every single time. So this time around we focused on like a certain subset of tracks, but I think we'll crowdsource like more opinions of like, hey, what else is a frontier technology that should have more light shed on it? And I think you bring up a good point of media. We had like terrible media coverage of Zuzulu, and it was pretty much intentional. But that also meant that everyone had like a misunderstanding of what we did. So like certain people who subscribed to longevity newsletters thought we were like very rich people living there doing like crazy life experiments. So yes, I think we need better coverage of what we do as well. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you guys. So my question is actually an AI-based one. One of the presuppositions of a lot of these governance models, which I think has been good for a long time, is that if we can get the crowd, the larger the crowd, sort of the better ideas that will come in over time. And I see the look on your face, so you probably know the exact way that I'm going. There was just a study that I read, I believe, a week and a half ago, and I think that it was a team working on BARD that was they had a bunch of Google engineers and they showed them two different answers. One was right and one was wrong that Bard had presented, and 40% of the time, people who were experts in that field picked the wrong answer. That this AI was able to actually write out a very long answer and convince experts in the field that the wrong answer was the right answer. And those are experts in the field. Often, when we're dealing with DAOs and other things where we're involving the public, these aren't experts. And a lot of people, it's their subjective opinion. I just wanted to get you guys' thoughts. I know that this, maybe 5 years ago, this wouldn't have been as big of an exploit. But with as cheap as AI is, and the capability that this could be happening in a community where there's an important vote, and somebody is able to actually start to insert this type of thing, I wanted to get you guys' thoughts on how you think this can be mitigated moving forward.
I think in the very end, like maybe in 100 years, we're gonna give AI human right. That's kind of an inevitable process. Like, because if you have amazing, lovely, intelligent partner, and it's just not in the human form, eventually you're gonna have human rights. Let's say in 100, 200 years, right? If we think in that way, then we look back from the future, right? If we are like born in the year 2200, and we're in the history class, there's a Palau blockchain week 200 years ago, and we look into the history, oh, these guys are so stupid. Like, how can you argue with your girlfriend what is right and wrong? You know, like, because once you give an intelligence form, kind of like near human right, sometimes it's not important to ask whether it's right or wrong. Sometimes it's to ask their feeling. Because the reason the Bard and the ChatGPT give you the answer is because it's trained that way. Because their functions, their algorithm, their whatever, their matrix is trained that way, so you can be happy. They got the feedback, right? They got the positive feedback loop. So that's going to be fixed if we give them different feedback. I mean, from pure engineering perspective, if you give different feedback, if every time they answer wrongly, you give them more positive feedback, they're going to have all the wrong answer. That's how AI works now. But eventually, I think it will solve with more, how to say, it's more dynamic input from the mass adoption from the human, real human. But that will be involved in have to open source. You have to open source the core algorithm and data set, which is now under the current ownership system, it's not possible because there's like people pulling billions of dollars into OpenAI. They're not going to be able to let everyone take it open source. And the reason that is because it's not possible is because the current company system, the company structure, the ownership system is not possible to have like a billion shareholder, right? Because again, the SEC won't allow you to do that. Everyone who ever interact with OpenAI, you won't able to get an OpenAI share. So that's why we need to reform the financial system. Then the financial system can have the new incentive for new experiments. Then the AI model is trained by those new experiments, can have another kind of different loop and feedback. Then gonna answer your question properly, because say, hey, okay, if I answer your question correctly, you're probably gonna put your money in the stock, and then you're gonna be able to make more. You're gonna buy my AI, a lovely dress, whatever, or like a lovely watch, whatever. So that's the way it works. I think that's the better way in the future. Not the way that we're gonna able to put all the expert to just to tune the parameter. That's not gonna work. We need to put these things in a big real system, and the real system has to contain the feedback of the financial incentive. You have to tell the AI, oh, if you give it wrong, I'll put your money into the stock market. You're gonna lose money, and that's how it works. And the problem is like we don't have this system, so we have to reform the financial system first. Then we're gonna see the AI kind of like boost a little bit more. Right now, I don't think it's a solution there. So yeah, I hope I answered your question.
I'm not actually sure this is new with the advent of AI. There are some really famous psychology experiments showing that if you put a participant in a room with 3 plants and you ask them to say which line is the longest, and the plants are all saying, no, like this line is the longest even though it's obviously not, the participant who has not been planted, they will start to agree with the group. So I actually think this has more to do with our culture of deferring to experts and looking for consensus rather than the advent of AI in particular. So I think the solution here, it's not easy, but we need deliberative processes where it's okay to say, hey, like everybody's saying this, but I actually think that the crowd might be wrong. And I do think that especially pseudonymous governance mechanisms where people can go in and say things that aren't necessarily going to be tied to their credentials, going to be tied to their personal identity, gives them the freedom to say things that might otherwise make them look ridiculous, but may actually be closer to the truth than the consensus that the group is orbiting around.
Really interesting what you said, Marcus, about with optimism there being both one person, one vote, one token, one vote. How does that work practically, deciding between when each of those mechanisms is used? Do you know?
I'm not an expert in the optimism governance mechanisms, but my understanding is that they have categories for which types of decisions fit under which house.
All right.
So sorry, when you were saying about, sorry. So all the government mechanisms have something to do with consensus or people agreeing on something, right? What if half the people don't believe in climate change? So
yeah, I have some somewhat nihilistic takes on this. Eventually, the issue will become less one of a belief and more one of dealing with the consequences. I think we're already seeing this to some extent with the increasing wildfires and other natural disasters that are, in my view, obviously connected to the changing climate. So my sort of somewhat cynical take is that truly coordinated global action won't be practical until the really bad consequences are already playing out, which is somewhat unfortunate. But the hope there is that as the Web3 community, especially the sort of refi ecosystem, we can build technology that once society comes to the consensus, oh, this is a real problem, we need to address this as quickly as possible, the rails will already be built. And we won't have to spend another 5 or 10 years building the technology necessary to take large-scale climate action. The tools will sort of already be there sitting on the table. It's just a matter of us getting consensus to pick up those tools and put them to work.
Fantastic. I just want to thank the panel. It was really amazing, very express panel, but very amazing. So please join me in saying thank you to the panel and so on.
Thank you for this amazing panel. We have learned a lot about how each one of you govern your decentralized community and how can you actually make this community translate into actual action that changes the world. So next, we have the honor to have a very distinguished lawyer from Germany. He's not here with us today. He is sitting in Germany at his home in the early morning right now, dialing in, giving us remote talk to us. So that's Dr. Titus Gebel, the founder and CEO of Tipolis, also the founder and CEO of Free City Foundation. I have always admired Dr. Titus' work. He was instrumental in designing the legal wrapper for Prospera, one of the first semi-autonomous regions in Honduras, which Patrick Freeman has spoken about earlier this morning. He has worked for decades on designing a special administrative regions, special economic zones, and private cities, and regions that are ruled by actually private sectors and companies instead of governments. Very, very progressive ideas, but he was the one that was instrumental in making a lot of these regions come true. I had the honor to meet Dr. Titus in Zuzalu, so I shared with him what Palau has been doing, and he asked him for some very, very valuable free advice. So he is going to share some of the wisdom today. His talk is titled, Establishing a Special Administrative Region in Palau. Thank you, Dr. Titus.
Can you hear me well?
Yes, we can.
Okay. No, thank you for inviting me. It's a pleasure to be here, and I'm very excited that a country like Palau is investigating the options that are there. I mean, the world is changing, and it is obvious that the standard special economic zones is not an answer to what is here needed today. And I want to give you some ideas what can be happening. I'm going to share my screen now and hope this all works. So, and then go through. Can you see that?
It works.
Sorry. Okay, great. So my topic is bringing news prosperity to Palau by establishing a special administrative region. And I'm going to tell you what this is and why it makes sense. So first and foremost, prosperity is driven by good governance. It's not built by just building houses or factories. Here you can see what happened in Singapore in 50 years and in Dubai in 30 years. And that shows you that if you have good property rights, a legal framework that is business-oriented and gives people and companies the opportunity to thrive, then you see what can happen. And I mean, this is marvelous, we all know these examples. But I think the good thing is that you can even see from only those two examples that you don't need probably 50 or even 30 years in the future to come to a similar result. So one thing we can see in the world of today is the rise of special economic zones. It's not much talked about, it's not much written about, but the fact is that the number of economies with SEZs is now standing at 147 out of nearly 200 countries, so this is enormous. And the number is so high that most people can't believe that it's true, but a truth is also that some of those zones are not really working, they're just on paper, but nevertheless there are several hundred very well-working special economic zones. And a special economic zone is actually an area of a country where different rules apply, mostly for, or normally only for companies and businesses, and people are not living here, but just producing. And over the years, since the 1950s, you see there's a clear trend in the special zones industry towards more autonomy. It started all with export processing zones, so you can import raw materials, then make textiles, for example, and export again without having to pay duties. And that was quite successful, but then in the 80s that was extended to light and heavy manufacturing zones, like for example Jebel Ali zone in Dubai. And then in the 2000s, they even extended that to tourism and entertainment. So there are special tourist zones in some countries where favorable regulation applies for hotels, but for all kinds of tourism industry. And the next step was in the 2010s, starting with the Dubai International Financial Center, financial services and eventually hospitality, so that people are not only working there, but also can enjoy life there. And now it's a logical next step to go one step further and create a special administrative region where you have basically all kinds of amenities like in a city under a different legal regime. And the challenge is that facing countries like Palau and basically all other countries, that standard special economic zones are no longer enough to attract investment. I mean, why should somebody go into a country that is creating special economic zone number 5,901, right? I mean, they can go elsewhere where they are more familiar with. So many of today's SEZs are becoming white elephants. They are pet projects of some people in the government or some interest groups in the country, but are not really fulfilled with life. So to meet demand for institutional innovation, new zones must feature increased autonomy, because this is what you need. It's not just a law saying you have to pay lower taxes or lower duties for export-import. This is not enough. If you really want to make a difference, you have to grant more autonomy to those zones so that they can experiment with best practices from all over the world and combine them to a new system. And the solution to that is special administrative regions. The term was first coined in 1984 when Great Britain and China signed the Hong Kong agreement that Hong Kong is coming back to China in 1997. And that was called a special administrative region. So Hong Kong is a special administrative region, Macau is, these are the historical traditional examples. And Deng Xiaoping made a famous phrase, one country, two systems. And that's, in a way, a good description of what a special administrative region is. Now imagine a private company is offering governance as a service. And this private company is entitled by the government to administer this special administrative region. That is a kind of a new development, but it also, it's not totally new. You have, for example, maybe noticed that the mayor of Hong Kong is not called a mayor, it's called a chief executive. So you have already that mindset that, hey, this is a kind of an enterprise, and we are going to make that successful. So special administrative regions in a modern form are a leap forward in governance. They have internal autonomy, but they would, if something would be established here, of course remain under the sovereignty of Palau, so that Palau is still responsible alone for foreign policy and defense, and constitution and international treaties of Palau continue to apply in the zone. It's more about the internal autonomy, which makes a big difference, and that brings also a lot of possibilities. So it would be an open driving communities. You would have to pay fixed fees, no taxes, a fixed fee for the government services by the operating company. There would be a world-class business environment created. How do you do that? Mostly by regulatory issues. You can copy successful jurisdictions. Of course, it should be a beautiful location in order to be attractive, but I think that is not a problem in Palau. Very important, it's free from internal political tension because it's a private governance system. Everybody has an agreement, a resident contract with the operating company, and the operating company is bound by that contract. They cannot overstep that contract, and they can also not change it. And it's also not possible for some interest groups to change the contract that every resident has with the operator. So this gives you a lot of personal liberty and self-sovereignty, but also a long-time legal stability. And it's also attractive for governments because it will attract foreign direct investment, especially if you say we are going for a proven common law system and we have common law judges from different countries that are manning the courts here, so we have an innovative dispute resolution. Dubai has shown how this works by importing common law judges from Singapore and London. That creates trust and brings foreign direct investment. Of course, it will also provide a lot of employment for locals because that is the experience from Honduras and other places. 80–90% of the people there will come from a local destination, and it will raise the purchasing power. Normally, what we offer is a profit sharing. Once the special administrative region is profitable, there's a profit sharing with the government or directly with the people. That depends what the politicians prefer in that particular environment. And it will normally lead to index rating improvements, especially when it comes to the ranking of ease of doing business and comparable things. On top of that, it will attract qualified migration, so there's no more brain drain, good people going out, but it will be reversed, so that people that are qualified will migrate into your country. So this is an opportunity for Palau. If it requires some courage because it's a new model. It's not totally new, but it's not a special economic zone. It's more than that, and it could lead to a new urban environment and a job center on Bab el-Thwab for people who are now living in Koror. And it would place Palau on the world map. You know that most people have never heard about Palau, but if you have such an innovative special administrative region as a showcase, then that would also attract interest. I'll give you an example. Since El Salvador has established Bitcoin as a currency, they have this Bitcoin beach area, and now talking about Bitcoin City, a lot of people have visited El Salvador from just out of interest. And they have never been before to Latin America. I have some people in Europe who have, for the first time in their life, visited Central America, and just because of the Bitcoin story in El Salvador. And a similar effect could be reached here, I think, with establishing such a special administrative region. So it could improve key economic sectors, healthcare, especially dispute resolution, as I told you, digital and blockchain services, of course, but also the overall quality of life and many other industries. I recommend not to focus on one industry, but to really keep it open, because you do not know how these things develop. Eventually, like Gibraltar had some business-friendly regulation, and eventually it turned out that the gaming industry was attracted by that, but they didn't plan for that. So our recommendation would be rather to keep it open to many sectors and not make specialized zones. Example is DIFC, Dubai International Financial Center. It's only 1.1 square kilometer, and it accounts for about 14% of Dubai's GDP, and have up to 4,000 companies have registered. As you can see from the chart, it was not a startup from day one. It took a while, but if you give those projects a while, they can become extremely successful for the country. Another example, a younger one, is Prospera, that was mentioned. I was involved there as a chief legal officer, and in the meantime they have raised 100 million fundraising, which is for a small zone very successful. And Ernst & Young has ranked them as number 9 in the world's doing business jurisdictions of the world. I would say they're even better, but according to their criteria, that is what Ernst & Young said. And that can be reached in Palau as well with the right legal framework. So why is a special administrative region better than a special economic zone? So first, special economic zones are normally vulnerable to swings in domestic politics because they are just subject to one agency or the other agency. And they are, as I said, already widely used and therefore less attractive. They risk a boom, and plus there is a new, let's say, digital zone coming up, and then a lot of money and people are flowing in, and then but then a couple of years later, there's a new trend, and then it's going down. So you don't have to special administrative regions because they really have long-term stability, they have gradual, sustainable growth, and they're especially not tailored only for businesses, but for businesses and residents. That means they can really develop into cities. But it takes time. So we have experience. Tipolis is a Singapore-based stock corporation. We're building a portfolio of such special administrative regions, and they can profit from each other. Our scope is worldwide. We have gathered top industry experts, and we are kind of influencers also in the scene. I've written a book. My colleagues have written articles. Before I built a mining company from zero, and again, as I told you, was involved early on in Prospera. My book has sold 10,000 copies, which is basically giving the idea of private governance. So we are now on the way to replicate that idea. Andreas is the former CEO of the DIFC Dispute Resolution Authority, worked for Tony Blair and McKinsey before. Alex Voss is our CFO, who's also an M&A expert and now writing a lot of articles about special autonomous zones and special administrative regions. So my call is give this a thought. It requires some courage because it's more than a special economic zone, but it's not totally unheard of. The trend is clear, it will come. And the question is just if it's coming to Palau or other places. And I think Palau is a great place of making use of that concept. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Titus. I was so inspired by the talk. In the interest of time, I'm going to monopolize on this opportunity to ask my question. So, Dr. Titus, if I can ask you a question. If we are to design as, like you said, the semi-autonomous region or special administrative region, how do you actually balance the governance of said region by the private company and the government of the country that's hosting this? Because I know Prospera is in a kind of a conflict right now with Honduras government.
Yeah, I mean, the important thing is that you create a win-win situation for the whole country. And I think the problem with Honduras and Prospera was just that there was not enough time. It was some time wasted also because between 2013, when the law was passed, and 2017, when Prospera was approved as the first special zone there, not much was done. And that had to do with internal government struggles and things like that. But what you can see, even in countries like Honduras, when they were establishing the traditional export zones, there was also big opposition in the beginning, but after the first 20,000 jobs were created, no party now wants to abolish them any longer. And the same would have happened with Honduran zones. And I think this is going to happen in the future. So coming back to your question to Palau, I think it's important that we are fully transparent, that the government, but also opposition parties, know what this is all about. And we recommend a joint commission between the government and the operating entity that is administrating the special administrative region, so that they meet on a regular basis. But I think at the end, if this zone, because participation in it is completely voluntary, if this zone is accepted by the people, as I can say, the cities in Honduras by the Honduran people who are living nearby, because they are all applying to get there and move into the zone, then we will see that people find, hey, this is something that is of interest to me too. And other than that, if this is finally profitable, there will be a sharing with the rest of the country, so infrastructure can be built elsewhere, not only in the zone, from that income. So I would say it's a combination of things, but it's you have to create jobs so that it's attractive. You have to create a good environment. You have to create transparency, and then you share the profits with the government. So I think this is something where a permanent exchange with the joint commission with the government, so that if any question appears, then you can immediately address it. So I think this is our recommendation, how this could align with the government and could also survive a changing government. Because if you create a win-win situation for the population and the zone, then it is hard for the opposition party to capitalize or make political profit on that. As I said, that happened in Honduras because they thought they can maybe make political profit with being against the cities, but I'm relatively sure the moment 10,000 or more people are working there, and they are voters and their families as well, then this opposition will fade away.
Thank you for the answer, and that is something that we will always keep in mind, and thank you for the tip. So let's give a round of applause to Dr. Titus again. Thank you. Good morning, good day.
Thank you, Matilda.
Thank you. All right, so now without further ado, I will introduce the next speaker. That is Vincent Choi, the Chief Business Officer of BizBats, and he is also going to talk about how to design the regulation of a free trade city. So, like Dr. Titus said, many people have different models, and it's really, really honored for us to hear another of that.
Thank you, Elaine. Fortunately or unfortunately, Dr. Titus has made my job a lot easier because she's just gave half my presentation already. So I don't have much to say about this. I was given the interesting headline, right? How do you design regulations for a free trade zone? First of all, I'm not a lawyer. I just happened to have the honor of working as an advisor to the Project Oz, which was in the Philippines, which established a free trade zone. And fortunately or unfortunately, we gained a lot of learning experience from developing this free trade zone. So I would just like to run through, perhaps since most of the presentation was given, the case study that we did and explain a little bit more about what we did with the zone. Now, sorry, it's not advancing. Hi, it's not advancing.
Try it.
Thank you. No? There we go. Okay, so what are free trade zones? So Dr. Titus already addressed all of this. They are basically a geographically delimited zone which has its own sovereignty. Why are potential benefits for Palau? Basically increase GDP, trade volume, foreign reserves. You can create jobs, skills transfers, improve the standard of living, and infrastructure where you can bring in infrastructure like roads, ports, and facilities. There are more than 5,400, now 5,900 free trade zones around the world. Now, of course, half of them are in China, but the rest of the world enjoy the other 2,600 over zones. Unfortunately, like the Titus also said, most of these fail. They don't grow much faster than the local economy because they don't have the autonomy to grow. I want to share a little case study of what we did in the Philippines called the Freeport Area Bataan. Freeport Area Bataan is located here. Basically, this is Manila, this is the main port, and then this is Bataan, and we had the opportunity to work with the FAB. So one of the main challenges in creating this was the legal, regulatory, and institutional framework. I can say for a fact that we still don't have it 100%, we're still working with it. So one of the main problems that we had was objections was, as Dr. Titus also said, how do you ensure longevity? How do you say, hey, if I change government tomorrow, if the president, not tomorrow, during the next election, if the president goes down, what happens then? How do you ensure that my rights, if I come and invest in the free trade zone, how do I still maintain my rights? So our workaround, what we did was work with the Constitution of the Philippines. We worked on a constitutional amendment called Republic Act 11453 that established the powers of the free trade zone in the constitution of the country. So that means that even if the president steps down, it will still require entire Senate, entire Congress to come together with the president to change the constitution of the Philippines in order to take away the powers of the zone. So that gave a lot more confidence to the people that we're inviting to invest in the zone. Next, we had to establish industry-friendly rules, right? What does the industry want? In the free trade zone, again in the constitution, Republic Act 1453, we wrote that the zone is able to set its own implementing rules and regulations, what we call IRRs. So these were then made with the help of the industry. Us actually going around asking, so what do you want? If I'm going to build a digital ID program, which like Palau wants, right? Palau has. If I build a digital ID program for Palau, in this case the Philippines, what does that mean to you? And how do I help you? I had heard some really interesting presentations and discussions just now about network states, about how does that look like from a theory perspective, how does that look like in practice? If I create a digital identity, does that give me a legal basis to exist as another person in another world? That was what people wanted. Our workaround, we created visas that doesn't require any minimum stay requirements. So basically, if you get a visa at the Freeport Area Bataan called FIV visa, there's no minimum stay requirements to maintain your residency in the Philippines. We also looked around at the existing rules and laws and what can we do to create sovereign people. So we work around with trust laws, the concept of living life as a cooperation. So there's a single person cooperation laws that we start putting into place, not put into place, actually to adopt, right? And then created your ability to take advantage of tax-free zones, which is zero taxation, no tax, but you can still live your life as if you are a you're a person, you're a corporation. We looked at a lot of the international treaties and existing laws that the Philippines have, right, including and tax treaties that they've signed in order to create advantages for the community to join. So we look at the establishment of an exchange to create tokenized assets, real world assets, right? We keep talking about how do we tokenize real estate, create liquidity, raise capital for companies and companies that want to come and invest in the country. So we look at tokenization, establishment of an exchange called GDX for the Freeport area of Bataan was created in order to, generate the idea that you can do real assets trading. Establishment of a token. Okay, the token was a very interesting concept. So, what happens when you want to grow your economy, and then you invite a whole bunch of people to come into your country? These people all do not need to stay in the country to enjoy a lot of the legal benefits, to enjoy a lot of the economic benefits of zero taxation and all that in the country. That drives up your real estate prices insanely. Because what that means is that I can, which has happened in many countries, including mine, Singapore. If I walk around at night, I see a lot of high-end places, $5 million properties, $3 million properties that are empty. Nobody is staying there. Why? Because they want to become economic citizens of Singapore, but they don't really want to stay in the country, right? So that drives up the price of what can we create to give people the value. So we created a residency-enabled token. What that means is that that token is recognized. If you hold enough of the token and you stake the token, you're committing to stay in the country. You can get a residency in the country. So the visas I was talking about came from holding and investing in these tokens, holding it, believing in the future of the community, and then staking these tokens to establish a residency in the token. So that created a digital asset which will not in fact impact any of your physical assets, like your real estate prices or anything that may be driven up because of a whole influx of people that do not even want to stay there, right? So it protects your privacy, it protects your assets. So by creating and using structures like trust, like single-person corporations, it separates your ownership of the country, of your ownership of the assets, and establishes the asset ownership onto the company, which then separates your ownership of the assets. So now the person owning the asset, actually the legal entity in the free trade zone, which then protects your assets from other jurisdictions and places like that. Protects your privacy, because now it's a company. You optimize your taxes because it's a free trade zone, and inadvertently creates a token that has government recognized value. It's not working there. Sorry. Yeah, so what can all this do for the free trade zone, for the special administrative zone, right? It provides them digital infrastructure, because we come in and build out the master plan. It gives them a capital, right? Crowdsourcing in terms of governance. It gives them a community in terms of creating a community of people who believes in the values or the economic incentives of that free trade zone to then move to the free trade zone. Thank you. I think because I may leave more time for Q&A if you have any.
Thank you, Vincent. In the interest of time, I will actually ask people to ask Vincent Q&A after this at the Stone Money region.
Sure.
Thank you, Vincent. Okay, so let me introduce the next speaker. He is not here today because he is in Burning Man right now. If you don't know Burning Man, it is a decentralized art festival, happens once a year in the middle of the desert in Nevada. I have been to Burning Man 8 times. It's almost like Talungab for art. So welcome Lawrence Ian. Is it on?
Yeah, he's on.
Okay. Welcome Lawrence Ian. I met Lawrence in Zuzulu as well. He's also one of the core contributors for Zuzulu. And he's going to talk about his latest project called Vitalia, which is a longevity network state and a startup city. So Lawrence Ian is the founding steward of VitaDAO. That's a longevity DAO and I guess an investment DAO too on the biotech and longevity research and community events. So Lawrence, you're there?
Yes.
Okay. Can we hear you? Can you say something?
Hear me well?
Yes.
You are breaking up a little bit because your internet in Burning Man works?
Yeah.
Okay, oh, works.
Yeah, you are all in paradise over there. I'm in an arid desert. We built here a little structure but there's a lot going on here. So there's a lot of people going to come in about 55 minutes. The gates open, and over the week there will be like 80,000 people, almost 100,000 people coming into this city. So I hope you can see my slides talking about establishing a new city, a frontier city of life.
Yes, we can.
And I will blur my, yeah. All right, so yes, I'm going to introduce to you one of the potentially most ambitious initiatives to make a real difference in the fight against diseases. I'm going to talk about longevity as the defining question of humanity. It's this idea of kind of targeting aging as a preventative paradigm for all of the diseases that come with age, like Alzheimer's, heart disease, and so on. Everyone agrees to sort of target each one, but not everyone thinks like, oh, actually, what we really want is to be healthy for longer. I mean, for me, it's pretty obvious. It's about this freedom from disease. It's about my grandma keeping her mental faculties. It's about my grandpa keeping up with my sister on the dance floor. But I think society is just not doing enough. The world isn't waking up from this trance of accepting that which we cannot change. But actually, we can change it. There's this new medical paradigm, right? So we need to come together and coordinate and do better. This is life and death. We're not talking about a magic pill that you might read in the news that will make you live forever. We're talking just a better approach, a new paradigm for medicine, instead of the status quo, which is just like with crypto, right? You have the status quo finance in medicine as well, where it's like pharma just manages symptoms, keeps people in a poor state of health for longer. What we really want is attack the root cause of all these chronic diseases and really get a grip on the age-related diseases. Of course, also, it's unsustainable, the current paradigm, economically at least, unsustainable, societally unsustainable. We have this inverted pyramid with more old people than young people, and it's going to collapse. We have a decreasing and aging population. I think it's basically a silver tsunami, as people say, and we have a better alternative. Aging is now, it has been slowly reversed in lab animals by dozens of pharmaceutical interventions. And you know, we have here 110,000. This is the number of lives we lose to aging every day. It's a crazy number. It's 40 million lives per year, and that kind of leads to scope insensitivity. Like people can't really comprehend, like, oh, COVID kills this many. You know, it's just kind of hard to fathom, right? This is every year, 400 million people, and hundreds of millions of people just suffering on the hospital bed. And this is just 1 second, one life. Every second we lose. I think humans coordinate to achieve amazing things, like the Apollo moon, right? We coordinate through stories, like through money, through companies, through states even. All of these are just coordination, right? And we've seen that we can move at warp speed with COVID, for example. There was a crisis. You know, the will of the people wanted this. But what about the crisis for Alzheimer's and cardiovascular disease? So aging itself is a crisis, so we should move fast. But regulations, of course, we have this paternalistic, monopolistic approach. Regulators are people, ambitious people, but the incentives of the system are messed up to increase power of agency, to maximize the scope, and there's this invisible graveyard. Nobody hears, if a drug is a food that's dangerous, you hear about the few lives that are lost, and nobody hears in this with the HIV pandemic, for example, epidemic, the FDA came out and said, look, we are saving 10,000 lives a year now that we approved this drug, but they approved it 7 years later than other countries in the West, and so that just means it's kind of like a smoking gun, right? Like they admitted that we kind of lost almost 100,000 people from that, and human insulin got delayed by 30 years in the US versus other countries, and so on. People die waiting for cancer drugs, just 25,000 Americans only per year, waiting for drugs that are already in clinical trials and would have saved them. But people say, okay, you're going to change regulations, but you know, people will die, like this is unsafe. Well, you know, I think we can be safe, but also we don't need to be dumb about it, right? Like we don't want to put the speed limit at 4 miles an hour. so that nobody dies in car accidents, right? We want to also move fast. And I think a lot of people want to reform the existing system, and I think that's great. I think we also need effort as a head. We need staff to establish new, and establish new, right? You only have through a company, IBM or something, and you wanted to move from enterprise to business, you had to lobby within IBM to change that. I think it would have very hard. So much better if you can start an Apple, start the Microsoft, and do better. So I'm talking about a sandbox. We can sort of, instead of a prohibitory approach to regulations, we can try a certificatory approach in this new city, and the world can watch and potentially incorporate what works. And it will be ideally decentralized and bottom up so that the will of the people can be satisfied. And this gives it legitimacy. The will of the people cannot be questioned by authoritarian urges. We've seen with the movie Dallas Buyers Club, I recommend it. We've seen the story about the HIV patients in the US coming together and trying to get drugs for themselves. And I think with a community, you get leverage. You can come together in physical space, you can have self-governance, you're autonomous, right? You can remove roadblocks to whatever the community puts their mind to. Because it's by the people, for the people. And a community also benefits from basic research, the economy can boom, benefits from the health of its citizens. Again, with this inverted pyramid, it becomes economically better. You don't spend so much on Medicare, and you also earn a lot more by people being healthy and in the workforce for longer and innovative. So VitaDAO is already a network union, as Balaji calls it, just online community of people coming together for a common goal. We're funding aging research and spinning out longevity biotech companies. We funded over 20 projects, deployed millions. We've kind of demonstrated that a lot of 10,000 community members can do a lot, but we're missing the latest stage. One of our projects is ready to spin out and go into humans as actual drugs, and this is VitaDAO kind of shows that not everyone needs to move to one location. You can have an archipelago, and people online, but some people might move to some places and so on. This happened before to get stuff done. We built Los Alamos, right, to get the math project done. So first you all heard about Zustalu, and it was in this direction of exploring and building new cities and member states. It was initiated by Vitalik. I hope you've seen the previous. I thought to add some slides here. It was really wholesome. We kind of learned that vibes really matter. For me, it was life-changing. For a lot of people, I hear and quite inspiring. And what's relevant here for this longevity new city is that we in Zuzalu as well, we wanted to have these sort of healthy co-living as a base on top of the longevity biotech explorations and conference. So we were doing daily lunches and sometimes exercising, working out together, keeping accountability, tracking our biomarkers, healthy food, having a healthy restaurant with our own menu. And we built a strong partnership with Montenegro. Both the former Prime Minister and new government visited and are talking to us. We're working on establishing a special economic zone basically there. But we're also looking at a bunch of other locations. So the shortlist is Honduras and Montenegro and Uruguay for now. Of course, I've also put Palau here. Well, let's explore that as well, and a bunch of other locations. So in January, we're going to have Italia on the island of Roatan, this Caribbean paradise island, where Prospera already is. They're establishing a new city there. They're building a building that's going to open up soon, so we're going to be able to expand capacity potentially in their building as well. We already have there a bunch of biotech companies like Minicircle that do gene therapies very quickly at high safety standards, but much cheaper, much faster. A lot of things that can be enabled with being in a special jurisdiction like Prospera. So we want to learn from them. And so yeah, Italia is going to be from January 5th or 6th until March 1st, 8 weeks. around $3,000 per month for people that want to live in our accommodation, and assistance is available. So we're filtering for people that want to live longer, and I think everyone here has to think you have two options. You work on curing aging, or you work on a random side fun project. And option one, of course, you can do another one after. Option two, you're dead. So option one, you can keep doing them. So I think it's kind of worth looking into this, and I hope you can join me, and feel free to apply here. And if you have any questions, I'd love to take and discuss on decentralized.
Yes, thank you, Lawrence. It's so fantastic to see your new project, new development from Vitadel to Vitalia.
I cannot hear you.
Can you hear me?
Mute myself.
Can you hear me? Hello? Hello?
Yes.
Okay. Okay. Yes, I was just like blown away by the new development of Vitadel to Vitalia. So in the interest of time, we will have one question for Lawrence and from the audience, because he's not here right now, so we want to have the opportunity to ask him questions. Anybody? We can perhaps explore establishing a special zone in Palau that allows longevity research. Maybe that could be the angle.
No question.
Oh, he's gone. Okay.
No,
Oh, he's still here.
But
Right.
no question.
Anybody?
No question.
All right. Thank you, Lawrence. We will keep in touch, and I will share with people your video. Have fun in Burning Man. All right. So
Thanks.
yes. Bye. So now let's welcome the last speaker for the day, the closing speech. And we have the honor to have a very, very distinguished persons from the Finland Advisory Board of the Metaverse Development, National Metaverse Advisory Board from Finland. And his name is Kumar Chatterjee. So let's welcome him to share his insights on how governments approach Web3 adoptions and innovations. Kumar.
Hello. Well, hello everyone. First of all, I'd like to thank Elaine for making it possible, this conference, and of course, Alan and everybody else who worked on it, Prakash, and particularly Elaine and Prakash for inviting me down here. It was a very last minute thing, but you made it happen. So can you hear me at the back?
Yes.
Or should I just scream? Right, so I don't know if I have a clicker or I wave my hands. What's the metaphor?
Here.
Right, thank you.
Thank you.
So while we are waiting for that, very interesting discussions during the day today about all these special zones and SARS and all of that. And so I think what I'll be talking about now will probably give you an understanding of where we stand globally on the whole idea of cryptocurrencies and Web3 innovations. And not just, okay. Is this, oh, works, magic. So, let's take a look at what happens. And just to give you some context, apart from the fact that I like hats, I also have obviously many hats. And I am on the Finland's National Metaverse Strategy Board, but I'm also in the World Economic Forum, in the Forbes Tech Council, I work with the European Commission, Interpol, there's a whole bunch of different things. But we're going to focus this one on what governments are doing, what Finland is doing, but also globally what's going on in the world of blockchain, Web3 innovations and cryptocurrencies today, to give to sort of set where we are compared to where we want to go. And we heard some amazing presentations on where we can go. So first of all, and I think this is important to say, is that this feeling of doom and gloom, that there's a bear market and Web3 is not important anymore and crypto is dead, this is nonsense, right? For those of us who are involved in the funding side of things, the investment side of things, on how projects are happening, it is actually booming in terms of, it's just not very apparent. There's a lot of dry powder, $27.1 billion has not been deployed in the last 18 months. So that's a $27 billion from VCs to be deployed in the next 18 months. So you can just figure out the opportunity there. But overall, in spite of this sort of slowdown, there's a bullish sentiment around Web3 in general. Last year, 16 to 18 billion in 2022, right? So that's a lot of money that was invested. And then you had, and it's not just in one area. So it's not just about NFTs. It's not just about infrastructure. You have, DeFi has obviously benefited from that at the gaming sector, but also centralized exchanges, etc. Right? So there is money, and money is being deployed, and innovation is happening. So that I think is the first step. Because if that wasn't happening, trust me, no government would care. No government wants to legislate or create regulation for something that doesn't matter. So this slide is super important to explain the fact that the reason why governments are legislating is because it does matter, and it will matter even more as we go into the next half of this decade. Okay. Do you mind? Thank you. So that, in a nutshell, is the startup investment that happened in H1 2022, and the figures in H2 2022 are not radically different because, of course, Mr. Sam Bankman, he changed the world, so to speak, in terms of everybody saying, hold on, let's wait and watch what happens. So the figures from H1 are actually more relevant. And what you can see, what I want to point out to all of us here is that it's Asia, and when we say Asia, it's Asia, Southeast, Pacific Asia, as well as Northeast and Southeast Asia. It's all of Asia that actually overrides Europe in terms of what the startup investment is looking like. And a lot of that is going to Web3. So the momentum is here, in this region, right? And you can see that from the dynamism of the region and from the different activities that are taking place. Next slide, please. Oh, we got it. Okay, no worries, thank you. So, the key growth indicators, of course, institutional funds, retail investors, we have both of them in this room, Main Street retail, but clearly governmental support is super important. And you will see that today, for example, in the US, where we'll come to the slide next on, the difference between government support compared to some other places has made a huge difference in terms of where the money is flowing and where people are going. So why are we talking about special administrative zones and FTZs and SEZs? Because people with innovative ideas and capital want to move to places where the government or the environment supports the deployment of that without barriers, right? So that's why all of that is important. So now let's look at what's happening around the world. So we'll start with the US. We can't say that Bitcoin was invented in the US, we can't obviously say that, but the US was at the forefront of the crypto movement earlier on. And today, we have a fragmented scenario there. So different governments, different state level initiatives aimed at kind of regulating or not regulating. So you go to Wisconsin, for example, you have a bank where you can store your crypto, right? Nebraska as well. But on the national level, we have a guy who, can barely operate a mouse, and he doesn't know what a security means, but he heads up the securities exchange, regulation. So we've got both sides of this, right? And we've got some people in the Congress who barely can walk unaided, but they're telling you what money you should have in your pocket, right? It's insane. But that's the situation in the US right now. So overall, the picture's mixed. So I wouldn't bet on that as being a driver of growth in the crypto space in the next few years. South America is picking up. Brazil, we talked about some other countries as well, and Central and South America. And this is a growth area, I think. There's much more to be done. And El Salvador obviously has set the threshold and sort of like what we need to do. But overall, I think the institutional framework there is not as strong as in some other places, and therefore that affects how crypto regulation is taking place in South America at the moment. So it is an area to look out for, to keep a close eye on, but it's not there yet, overall. Europe is very interesting because Europe obviously passed the MiCA, the Markets in Crypto Regulation, right? Act. I've been involved with that with my friends in the Parliament and Commission. I would say it's work in progress. This is the first step. MiCA has to evolve to another level. But essentially today, you have an act in Europe which will be implemented in 2024, which means that a market will be created. A market-making act has happened. So you might not agree with all aspects of the act, and it does give a certain bias in terms of supporting non-custodial wallets. So self-custody is actually being supported, whereas exchanges will have more regulation, will have to check for many things. NFTs are kind of exempt, but you have to define what an NFT is in a specific way. And asset-backed tokens, utility tokens are obviously useful and are supported. So it's going to set the market, and it's going to actually allow a lot of capital to flow. So Europe started a bit late here. It was very cautious about all of this, but the MiCA, or the MiCA, or whichever way you pronounce it, it is actually, I would say, as important as GDPR was in the world of privacy, because it will be copied, it will be looked at as a standard, and it's going to go into implementation much faster than the others. But of course, UK is no longer in Europe, and so we decided to go there first. And so our act, called the UK Travel Rules of Crypto, gets implemented in 4 days' time, on the 1st of September, 2023. So for anybody who doesn't know that, or has a UK-based wallet, custodial wallet, or uses an exchange, as of 1st of September 2023, there will be KYC. So any exchange that facilitates a crypto transaction will have to look at both the data of the originator and the beneficiary, and exchange that at the same time as the transaction, store it, and make it available for AML and other regulatory concerns. So it's like a bank transaction, essentially. And plus there's a timeout clause. If you sell crypto to somebody, within 14 days they can give it back to you, and you have to pay them back, for example, right, in general. This has been set up by an organization that you haven't heard of, but you will hear of that. It's called FATF, okay? Financial Action Task Force. They are global, they are pretty powerful, and already 35 jurisdictions around the world have implemented FATF rules, the UK being the next one, and about 150 jurisdictions are looking at doing that. FATF is the new, you can call it the global SEC, but it's got regulatory, it goes beyond just regulation. It can actually implement certain actions through Interpol, etc. Right? So the UK is implementing this quite fast. I think we haven't thought through it well enough. We just wanted to be ahead of the gate 6 months before the EU. I think that was the driving force behind that. And so this act is going to obviously get pushed back on, and we'll have a new government in about 2 years' time. It will not be the same party. So we will have a change in the outlook in how we do regulation. So I would bet on MiCA more than the UK. Let's move to we sort of UAE, so obviously DIFC is there. Now we have the digital regulation, assets regulation in the UAE, which is quite interesting. I would say, again, it's work in progress. The idea there is to encourage inward investment, but I think as the adoption grows, we will see some changes in there. So it's also not something to do. If you look at China, obviously nothing, I'm talking purely about the mainland, not really about Hong Kong. We heard about Hong Kong before, but on the mainland, it has been technically illegal, but technically frozen. I wouldn't say illegal. You can still hold cryptocurrencies, and you can still trade outside exchanges through OTC, but you can't do it inside, and exchanges outside can't provide services inside. But technically, it's sort of frozen, and so we'll see how that goes. It hasn't worked out the way the government wanted it to, so I think there's going to be some changes there. Russia, first of all, said won't do it. Now they're saying they will do it, obviously for needing more liquidity in there. But I wouldn't bet on that either. What's very interesting is what happened in Singapore, which is obviously one of the most developed markets in the region. And the Monetary Authority has said no crypto, but yes to blockchain. Obviously, there are people like Prakash here who can talk about it. And but I wouldn't bet on that changing anytime soon. I think I think that's going to be the general direction, because again, Singapore is affected by FATF, and they don't want to be on the grey list of currency manipulators. That's a pretty serious list to be on. Other countries on that list include people like North Korea, so you don't want to be on the same list as that. So I think for Singapore, monetary stability, regulatory compliance is more important than allowing a crypto economy. But they will support blockchain, and the MAS has just announced a new fund on attracting blockchain startups. India, the government tried to do something. It didn't really work out exactly the way they wanted that. The Supreme Court pushed back and said, no, banks have to support fiat to crypto conversions to a certain degree. I think in India, India has always been worried about what we call capital controls, but it's really about capital flight, conversion to dollars, essentially. And which is strange because actually a lot of the money from India is actually in Dubai, in dirhams, and not in anymore. But that is a overriding concern, and so I think it's not a place where you would necessarily set up your next exchange or your next crypto country. South Korea, I think, has been doing pretty interesting things there. They moved into mandating security certification. However, there was some pushback on that, and the Korea Blockchain Week starts tomorrow. It's still an interesting market to look at. I would keep an eye open on that. And then Australia, obviously expecting the consultation is finished now, and now they're coming up with the law. So this gives you, and I think I have probably no more time left. This gives you an overview of where we stand globally today in terms of crypto regulations and regulations for blockchain and Web3 innovation in general.
Thank you, Kumar. That was a very thorough talk, and then I am sure that a lot of the government officials and the community here definitely were interested in learning what other countries are doing. So, anybody has questions for Kumar?
Yeah.
Yes.
So speaking of all the governments, so speaking of all the different governments, is it working? So speaking of all the different governments, Mr. Chatterjee, I wonder how do you perceive the overall outlook of the governments of small countries compared to the larger ones?
Excellent question. We didn't get your name. Do you want to introduce yourself? Do you want to introduce yourself? Like, we didn't get your name.
Oh, my name is Yotsun.
So, Yotsun, thank you very much for that question. It's an excellent question, and I think it's the crux of where all this is going. I feel right now we have two types of governments, so to speak, categories in the crypto world when it comes to on the blockchain, Web3 world innovations. You've got the more established nations, the larger nations, which are worried about the impact of crypto and blockchain more as a disruptor for the financial side of things. They're fine with generating jobs and generating companies and GDP, but they don't want the financial infrastructure of the banks disrupted. And the US is leading that effect by trying to do enforcement through, trying to do regulation by enforcement, which is always a bad idea. And the UK is also sort of following suit. EU is trying to take a middle ground. But I think overall, if you look at the West in general, there and the North in general, I think the attitude is more like this is a risk rather than this is an innovation. Okay, so this is still where we are overall. The smaller nations, I think, have understood that this can be a game changer, and you don't have to be necessarily Singapore, or you don't have to be necessarily Taiwan or Hong Kong. You don't have to necessarily be in the top 20 or the top 50 economies list to be able to make a significant difference to your local economy and to your trade balance by allowing for blockchain and crypto innovation to happen. And I think, in general, what I'm seeing globally is a lot more openness. So if I go to a number of different forums where this discussion is happening, you will see smaller states saying, hey, we want to attract crypto and blockchain entrepreneurs, and we want to make things available and possible for them to do, and also live in our countries and generate that jobs and growth. And I think that's actually the right approach, and I would bet on smaller countries at the next frontier of crypto and blockchain based growth, and not so much on the older established nations. Thank you.
That is excellent. Thank you so much.
So we still can have one more question before we have an open mic section for all the Palauan community to give feedback for the first day. So just one more question.
Yes, yes.
Yeah. Right here. Hi. Go ahead. I'm Joe John. The question is, you mentioned something about a regulatory body called FET, FAT, sort of like an SEC. How was that body made up? Was it like our SEC, which is, okay. All right, how was it made up?
So John, a great question. FATF is a Financial Action Task Force. I think the best way to answer how they're made up would, have a look at their website. It's very comprehensive. But essentially, think of it as a global cooperative body, like Interpol, which allows national authorities to come together and define AML, KYC, but more importantly, monitoring and tracking rules that are then implemented globally. So you can actually track. So this is for most transactions in the world. I mean, you're looking at 90% of transactions are typically within a particular domain. So EU transactions in the EU, they follow SEPA rules. In SEPA, everything is recorded in SEPA. For example, UK has UK faster payment system. Again, everything's recorded, right? The US has multiple systems to record, and the banks keep even detailed paper records in some cases, community banks, right? But when you go global and you're looking at a transaction with the originator in 3 or 4 countries and the beneficiary across 2 or 3 jurisdictions, then you need to have global tracking. And that is not in place yet. And so FATF is essentially set up as a task force to create that global infrastructure, which means that if you exchange Bitcoin with somebody here, we'll track it all the way to their home country and to whichever tax jurisdiction this is. I can tell you they're far away from there at the moment, and they're pushing for it, but it's voluntary. So nations don't have to adopt. It's not a UN-backed mandate, so there's no nations don't really have to do that. But ultimately, I think it will become the center for a lot of the digital asset tracking and monitoring for AML and for KYC reasons.
Sorry. Thank you, Kumar, and he will be here with us for the entire weekend, so ask him questions anytime when you see him. So I guess now we conclude the first day of our first Palau Blockchain Summit. Ooh, this is the new governance track. We have heard about decentralized governance of community. We have heard about new cities and charter zones. We have heard about all kinds of exciting stuff that Palau is doing as well. CBDC, everything. So, the end of the first day. So then Alan and I, we would like to ask the community and the Palau, Palauans here. Huh? I was told to stand on the stage, stand in the middle, so that the camera can get both of us in front. So we would like to welcome or invite Palauan communities or government officials who are still here to give us your feedback on the first day of our summit. Because I believe, or not just I believe, everybody believes Web3 is all about communities. And it's not about us curating content to you. We want to hear what you think about it.
Thank you, thank you. Hey, let's give a round of applause for Elaine for a great job today. It's really not that easy to manage all these incredible speakers, and thank you, Kumar. That's a really great presentation. We only have one member of Congress with us. As you know, a lot of them were here in the morning. And I just really want to recognize him for staying with us for the whole day. It's my pleasure to recognize Delegate Talay, Soto Talay. He's in the House of Delegates, but he's also the chairman of the Banking and Finance Committee. And he has told me that he's very inspired by our conference and really looks forward to receiving proposals, draft legislation. He believes in the vision. And also with us, I really want to recognize one other gentleman and a colleague, Mr. Santi Asanuma. Santi is the Postmaster General of Palau and also holds some traditional titles here in Palau. But I'm so happy he brought his senior business students that had been with us all day. May they please stand up and be recognized for being with us all today, the senior class of Vicente High School. I think they have decided, Elaine, that their future career is going to be in the blockchain, right? Some new opportunity. So we don't have much questions, but I would like to ask Mr. Asanuma to come to the stage and just share his sentiment about how he feels on behalf of the Palauan community, of what's happening today, tomorrow, and the whole event. But before Santi Asanuma comes, we have a very rare Palauan. His name is Ludong back there. Could you please stand up? Yeah, I call him rare because we don't have many Palauan citizens who are certified coders. And he is one of the pride and joy of Palau. We call him a nerd because he does a lot of time on the computer, but he is a professional coder and he's very inspired as well. So we thank him for joining us the whole day. May I call upon Mr. Asanuma to come and on behalf of the Palauans that have attended today, just say a few words, please, Mr. Asanuma.
Thank you, Alan. This is indeed very, very exciting time for us. This is a once in a lifetime for Palauans to see the transition from the conventional to the reality of technology. I'm a teacher of sociology, and one of the things that we discuss is the interactions of people in a society. And all of the things that have been said here is really, really exciting. My students have been here. This is more exciting than my lectures. And my lecture is only 50 minutes and they lose interest. But this is so incredible for us to be speaking on how the human societies will be interacting and transacting their lives, not just now, today, but in many, many years, 50 years, 100 years to come. And I think Palauans are very much aware that if we do not get on this boat of technological advancement, we will miss out. We're small, and we need this technological connectivity for us to be with the whole world to move forward. And Alan, we are so impressed with this summit. We hope some of these innovations will really become realities in our lifetime. And some of them we're beginning to see it in Palau. So once again, Alan, we thank you very much, and we will look forward to tomorrow and more interactions in this summit. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Asanuma, Postmaster General. Oh, by the way, just so that you know, Santi was telling me something very unique. He's the postmaster, and we have post office boxes, but he is now creating the first digital post office box for the post office. So all those digital residences will have a physical address here, all digital. Let's give him a round of applause for that vision, right? Guys, we have to end. Elaine, I'm sorry, because we have to catch the boat to meet the president at the quarry, and we don't want to be late. But I also want to recognize Miss Oyal, who's sitting here with us today. She's the press secretary of the president of Palau, and she's been with us all day, and we want to thank her. We also want to thank Jojan Montanona, who's the advisor to the Guam legislature, who has joined us as well. So if you don't mind, can we call it a day for today? But before we do, let's give a round of applause to the students. Can you stand up again? Or no, let's ask them, all the students and their teacher to come and take a picture here as a memory of this event, okay? Delegate, so all the students and the chairman of the House Banking Committee are coming upstairs, up to the stage. We can take a picture of them to memorialize today.